Chapter 10. Trapped. Analysis complete. Remaining pack efficiency is at 47%. Zim sat, slumped on his command chair without having the motivation to move or even lift his antenna in acknowledgement. His mind was elsewhere, sometimes racing, sometimes halting together as emotions ran amok. Sometimes he couldn't even think at all, and his eyes were as blank as his mind. His pack was draining like an irksome battery that could never be recharged again. There was a biological Audiobook scanner down in his med lab that would determine exactly what was happening to his body, but he was too scared to see it in print, too scared to know exactly how he was degenerating. Besides, he already knew he was dying. What more did he want to know? Yes, he supposed that knowing would help prevent said degeneration, but not indefinitely. The computer would dispense pills to prolong his life a little longer and make it all a little more comfortable. But if he were given more time, what exactly would it achieve? He stared blankly at the opposite screen in front of him, feeling chilled, yet not bothering to seek a thermal blanket or even to verbally give the command to raise the temperature of the room. His pack was betraying him, day by day, little by little. It was not the end he foresaw. This inevitability was something he never wished to accept, something he never wanted to admit. There were always ways, weren't there? But then he saw that there was no magic solution, no escape, no cure, no deus ex machina. What will be my death, I wonder? Will it be at the hands of Gur, or will it be from my own pack, my own age? He dwelled on it, wondering if it would be better to die violently and quickly from a malfunctioning SIR unit, or to die slowly, being crippled little by little until he could no longer feed himself. And what of Gur? If Zim chose the former, Gur may no doubt wake up from his glitch only to see what he had done. Was that fair to Gur, leaving him with the fact that he had murdered his master and father? I do not want to die slowly like a feeble elder, he thought. I could try and do the pack's adjustments myself, but I have no idea what I'm doing, and I don't have the required technology. If anything, I could make the pack worse. I could make my end even more painful and slow by accident. I do not care to do that. Have to think positive. Have to get through this. I will not be beaten. I do not want to go to the fall just yet and be recycled. Zim will not allow it. He thought of requesting another Urkin to do the work, an engineer perhaps, or a specialized pack surgeon, but they would refuse for fear of treason. For that kind of repair, without permission from the tallest, was highly illegal, and a small Urkin who never grew was deemed unfit by default. Whatever his options, he was running out of time. But there was still one thing he had to try and do, even if it would eventually end in failure. He had to save Gur. Ironically, it was a damn sight easier just to destroy the little robot. Gur was an insane, retarded child, but he was his child nonetheless. Zim believed he could fix him, even if it was the last thing he would ever do. In the meantime, he needed to secure Gur in some form of a cage to keep him from harming him or anyone else. And then he could pool all of his resources together and just try. The extra work would no doubt hasten his own death clock, but he'd rather do that than do nothing at all. Urkins were, after all, programmed to be productive, programmed to keep busy and see the best in every bad situation, and Zim was no different. While he could still move and breathe, he would work to fix his little metallic child. Stiffly, he slid off the command chair with renewed motivation. Computer, store the data and reschedule another pack analysis in exactly 6 hours from now. In the meantime, I shall begin to make a reinforcement chamber. I will require your assistance.
Yes, Master.
What would happen to his base after he was gone? His programs, his computer, Gur. Dib may very well absorb everything the Urkin owned and keep it to himself, or share it with the world. Zim decided that he would begin a massive computer shutdown sequence once he no longer needed sections of his base. Then, when it was nearly over, he'd destroy everything. As for Gur, if that robot ever got fixed, he could run away and do what he liked. Zim chose a suitable room that once accommodated a large supply of hoarded human junk. The computer dispensed of the mess, crushing it down to little cubes before depositing them in his giant recycling room for renewed material. Then the room was cleaned up and brightened, and Zim began fitting in panels along the interior of the wall that were made out of chronosis, a metal that resisted high temperatures and physical blunt forces. Even many parts of the massive were made out of this exact material. As a result of its popularity with the Urkins, it was becoming quite rare now, and acquiring more of it was quite impossible. So Zim had to reuse many panels and other parts of his base for this one chamber. Even the floor and ceiling had to be covered with the stuff to prevent Gur escaping. During the operation, Zim had to stop many times, sure he'd either pass out or vomit up something. His legs were shaking more and more as of late, and his heart kept skipping in his chest. It made him weak and dizzy. Meanwhile, the computer continued to set panels systematically, using big grappling claws for hands that extended from the ceiling. Zim dubiously watched, wondering if this new cage would work at all. It was awful, knowing that he'd have to soon trap his very child in here. Even though Gur was no Urkin, Zim was still preciously attached to him. He was after all the closest thing he would ever have to owning a real Urkin child, or something resembling a child anyway. While the machines worked, in fearing the ultimate end, Zim selected a blank disc from his library and slotted it into a recorder. For 7 or so minutes, he perfected his message, saying about as much as he cared to say. He kept it short, concise, with military precision, or so he hoped, saluting at the end as if he was saluting to a well-respected comrade. Once the duty was complete, he ejected the disc and ferreted it away to have it later delivered to a certain young man, if he remembered. It took all day to get the chamber ready for its new occupant. When it was finally complete, Zim inspected it one last time, making sure all the seams were fully melted and reinforced and that the panels weren't dented during the operation. It had gone smoothly. He had almost hoped for something to go wrong so that he wouldn't be able to go ahead with his plan. But as it happened, nothing had gone wrong, and his plan was going ahead, whether he wanted it to or not. The room was big, exceptionally big to hold something so small, and within contained nothing at all. No tables, no windows, and no light fixtures. The only door was the reinforced one, permitting entrance and exit under 4 locks. Holding chamber complete, the computer said when the final panel was welded in place, and after Zim had already visually inspected the room for flaws. Very well. Baiting Gur was the easiest thing imaginable. Selecting an assortment of snacks, Zim put them all on a plate and then onto a tray. Carrying the tray, he took them to the furthest corner in the room and left them there. Then, he returned to the upper floor, back to the lounge. Zim still smelt faintly of burning glue and metal, but he very much doubted Gur would notice. As it was, the robot was still watching TV as if nothing else in the world mattered. It was cartoons as usual. This time, it was a show called Billy and Mandy. Zim often watched it himself. It was the one program he didn't mind watching out of 100 others that were just shit. Gur, I have your dinner ready. It's waiting for you. Dinner? Gur looked around at him, smiling and all. Holy pigs! Yes, Gur. Now follow me. He sharply turned with his hands behind his back, military style, and proceeded to a little cubbyhole where he could access the stairs. He did not like using the elevator with Gur standing abreast from him anymore. Being trapped in a confined space when Gur attacked him would be suicidal. He descended the stairs, trying to act confident and nonchalant. If Gur picked up on this trick, then it was possible his whole objective would fail. What is it? Gur asked behind him. What's what? The dinner? Oh, you know, the usual junk food you like so much. Oh, Master, I love you! And he hugged his Zircon leader firmly. Zim froze, tensing all over, expecting those innocent little cyan eyes to flash a murderous red at any moment. He tried not to panic, even though all he wanted to do was panic. Yes, Gur, I love you too. Now let go of me, or your food is going to get cold. That did the trick, and Gur let go. Zim then continued the way down, into the brightly lit and warm recesses of his inner sanctum. This is the last stretch. If Gur can last this long without going into duty mode, then I've done it. Pigs! Gur chortled behind him, throwing up his arms in elation. They got to the holding chamber. The controls by the door were ready to be utilized. Go on in, Gur. Your dinner is just a little ways inside, Zim said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the doorway. Gur peered inside, standing a little too closely to Zim. In there? Yes. Go on, Gur. I don't have all day. Okay. And he hurried on inside, straight for the far tray loaded with waffles, pots of syrup, tacos, and peanuts. Zim hit the switch and the door slammed down, initiating the 4-lock sequence. There was a tiny window in the door for Zim to look inside. He watched Gur approach the plate, and then he began to stuff his face with all the food. He did not seem any more aware of the room than he had been upon first seeing it. Zim smiled a little at his victory. It had all gone according to plan. Now, he just needed to get to work on customizing some components and legally switching out Gur's faulty parts for these modified ones. He was hit by another fit of coughing, and he stood by the controls, holding his chest as something burned deep within. There was a voice inside, as sweet as honey. Master? Master, is that you? Where'd you go? It's all lonely in here. Master? Master? Zim took a breath and managed to allay his coughing spell. This is only temporary, Gur. I need to find a way to fix you. But there's no TV in here. Yes, I know. He began to walk away, fearing that Gur's pleas would weaken his resolve. As he went, he could hear Gur shouting after him. No, Master. No, don't go. I'll be good. I'll be good. Zim kept going until he could no longer hear Gur's appeal. He felt physically drained. When he returned to his workshop, the first thing he did was plug in his pack for analysis, wondering how much working on that holding chamber had sapped him. Analysis complete, reported the computer. Remaining pack efficiency is at 33%. He grumbled as he detached the cables from his pack. So much to do. Where do I begin? He only had time to work on one thing, be it his pack or Gur's modified parts. And he knew that he might as well be blind if he tried to do anything to his pack. He knew basic repair. That was it. Nothing about the inner gyrios or the fatal layer within the Spider Lake contraption to access his delicate life support and memory drives. Get it wrong and he was basically fucking up his own brain surgery. No. He had to fix Gur. That at least he could try and do. Master, said the computer from above as Zim brushed aside junk of his previous DIY devices from across the work surface. The box of deceased Darkins are still in the lounge. What do you propose to do with them? Chuck them, Zim said. I don't care. They may be heathens for all I know. Or defects. He caught himself and suddenly found himself feeling guilty, like he had crossed some moral line. Very well, returned the computer. I shall dispose of them discreetly through the sewer system. No. Have them deported back into space in caskets. Let them float through the stars. It was enough. At least they, whoever they were, would not become recycled material if they did not go to the fall. Now he just wanted to get on and work. As you wish. He sat on his chair, humming to himself as he adjusted a delicate cryosphere. Once all the struts were in their aligned slots, he put it down and reached for a common screwdriver. Most of what he needed had to be salvaged from other machinery, namely parts of his own base, and that of other devices such as robots he had plans of using to destroy mankind. It was a shame he had to dispose of their most valuable assets to save one SIR unit, but he did not mourn this loss, only find it irritating. Funny, really. He had still hoped to use his machines to destroy the Earth, he just never got around to it. He connected glyph optics together to form a live cable, and as he went to connect that to a modulator, he was thrown into a fierce bout of coughing. Pretty soon, he couldn't get in enough air to save the fire in his lungs. When he was finally done coughing, he helplessly vomited all over the surface of his workstation, covering his tools and implements in a mixture of bile and blood. He cursed, swatting at the equipment in pure anger. They were ruined. Still coughing, he swiveled his chair around, and when he vomited, this time his spew hit the floor. "Oh, Urk," he spluttered, dark green spittle running down between his lips. This was no good. "Use the biological scanner. Make a prognosis. Computer may offer up solutions. Solutions are good." His spooch grumbled and hurt. Each cough produced more fluid. Zim staggered from his chair to rest on the floor while great feverish shivers tore through him. He waited for it to pass, thinking that it must surely pass. It did pass, but only some time later. He must have fainted during it, for he woke up on the floor with no knowledge of what came immediately before or after. He remembered leaving his chair and hunkering on the floor like an elder, but that was all he remembered. He tried to sit up, feeling stiff all over. He managed to lift his body upright while he braced his hands on the floor. Then he rose his knees up until he was sitting. "Computer, what time is it?"
"It is exactly 8:38 noontime.
Weather report."
"Cloudy, with a touch of frost. Temperatures will be hitting a low of 4 degrees Celsius.
"Computer, get my coat, scarf, and gloves. I'm heading out."
"Yes, master."
Adjusting his bulky coat around him while habitually checking that his contact lenses were safely sealed around each fuchsia eye, he more limped than walked down the sidewalk beside the busy road. He had so much to do and not all that much time to do it in. It was Nurkin's worst nightmare, other than being captured and dissected, of course. However, when he was halfway up the adjacent street, he stopped suddenly. For the life of him, he could not remember why he was out here, or why he'd even left his home. What was his mission? What was his plan? He had it, just a moment ago, in his head. Now it was lost. Zim turned back, wondering if he should just hurry all the way home when he couldn't recall the route there either. He threw a fist against his head as if sufficient self-punishment was enough to resurface his recently lost memory. "Oh, I'm so foolish. Think, Zim, think. It isn't hard. You've been out here for what? 40 Earth minutes? Come on, I had a mission. A perfectly good mission. And I'm sure it had something to do with Gur, or Dib, or something amazing. Oh!" He turned, and now was no longer sure which way he'd been heading, and which way was home. The street, usually recognizable, wasn't, especially under the descending light of dusk. The cars rushed on by, their headlights on full brightness. These narrowed, concentrated cones of light went straight into Zim's eyes, causing him to go temporarily blind. He swiped the air in front of his eyes instinctively, but he couldn't shift the dizzying spots of white and black floating in his vision. His sudden, violent fever didn't help either. He went the wrong way, and a car beeped its horn at him when he took one step onto the road. He jerked back onto the pavement, shivery with fever and anxiety. And as if his misfortune just wasn't enough, he felt the first drops of rain pattering coolly against his unprotected neck. These droplets slithered down his collar, and he began to feel a mild burning sensation. As he looked up, his eyes still half blinded by headlights, he felt more rain hit his face. Immediately, panic mode setting in, he backtracked to the far wall of an office building, but there was no roof to protect him. "Have to get back, before I turn into a melting puddle of Zim." It did not help that he remembered the fate of the Green Witch from watching the Wizard of Oz movie. Taking a direction and hoping it was the right one, Zim blindly ran. Not far ahead, in fact, only 20 yards further up the sidewalk was Gary, Dib's colleague. He was a fully fledged investigator like Dib and worked either at the office or he freelanced around town. He stood at a vendor, buying coffee and a box of donuts. Luckily, the thin awning of the vendor kept him safe from the rain, but he did have an umbrella. For now he was using it as a walking stick, for it was still folded up. "Thanks for the coffee," Gary said, taking the hot cup from the cellar when Zim blundered into him. Gary dropped the coffee and it spilled onto the cold, wet pavement, sizzling as the heat began to evaporate. Zim had fallen over, scuffing his knees in the palms of his hands. "Hey, watch where you're going, you dumb idiot," Gary said, waving the folded umbrella at him. Then he stopped and stared, his words falling short as if he'd just been hit over the head. Zim stared back up at him as he tried to get to his feet. The task was rather difficult. His spooch suddenly felt like it was about to pop. What are you looking at, you big dumb human?" Then Gary pointed and shouted, "Oh my god, it's a motherfucking alien!" "An alien?" He blinked, feeling uneasy. As he jerked back to his feet and began backpedaling, he saw one of his eye contacts floating in a steadily forming puddle. Oh, right. He turned and made a mad dash for it. Gary was close behind, waving his umbrella high over his head. "I've got you!" Gary was shouting. "You can't run from me, little Martian!" Zim ducked and weaved through the pedestrians, stricken with fear. All he wanted to do was run with his pack legs, but that would blow his cover once and for all, and he could potentially have the whole street thirsting for his blood. Dib's words thundered through his head. "They're going to find you, they're going to capture you, and they're going to kill you. And what place is that, Zim? Tell me." Is that where I stand, watching you get dissected? Is it my place watching you scream and cry while they hack your arm off? Because this is the reality. I won't be able to save you when they come for you. Stop! Stop, you miserable little creature! You're mine! Gary was shouting. Many people dived out of the way, confused, while Zim ran like a spooked cat. He did little damage, considering his height, but Gary just barreled through the people too slow to move out of the way. Zim knew he could not keep up the pace. His spooch literally felt like it was going to pop or something, and the thickening haze of fever made him sick and disoriented. If he fell over once more, or his spooch did burst, he was going to be captured, and Dib would be there, watching him sadly from the other side of the glass, saying, "I told you so." Zim ducked down an alleyway and pelted past garbage sacks and trash cans. In his haste, he had knocked some of them over and they spilled onto the floor. Gary, seconds behind, had to jump over them. His box of donuts had been dropped somewhere down the street. A gust of wind knocked Zim's wig clear off, exposing his antenna. This did not help the situation, and now without the wig, the raindrops could land on his head. But due to the pain in his body and his current predicament, he barely noticed the rain and its discomfort. Zim skidded round a blind corner and kept on going. However, he was slowing down. He had no stamina left. Usually in these dire situations, he called for Gary using the communicator from his pack, but now there was no robot to rely on. He was on his own. Keeping a clawed hand on his left side, he almost charged straight into a fence. He bounced off it, screaming out from the agony it caused in his spooch. Gary was upon him in a moment, slashing the umbrella down as if it was as dependable as a sword. Zim rolled out of the way, using his inbuilt reflexes, and the spike of the umbrella lashed into the dirt. Close-quarter combat was in Zim's favor, despite his weakened state. His pack legs exploded outward on either side of him, and they curled forwards like demon spikes. Gary opened his mouth and let out a girly scream. As Zim pulled one spider leg back, about to propel it forwards to deliver something fatal, he paused, eyes wide. He had his back to the playing field, and before him was a dilapidated building the teachers used for religious studies. Dib, young and small, had sunken into the grass, crying. In his hands he held the alien's PE shirt. Then he dropped it to hold onto his arm that was bleeding a stark, angry red. Zim, mordantly disturbed, watched as the red plopped heavily onto the grass like paint. Dib? Stink? He got smacked over the head with the umbrella. He went down like a sack of grain. Gary stood over him, breathing hard from the sprint here. "You dirty little monster! More dangerous than you look, aren't you? Well, that's okay. You just lay right there while I call for some backup." As he stuck the spike of the umbrella into Zim's throat, he whisked out his phone and started to make a call. Zim blinked, and the last contact in his eye fell out, exposing his true alien nature. His pack legs were still unfolded, and lay like shafts of scaffolding around him. "Hey! You!" he snapped at Gary. His threat was supposed to sound mean and arrogant, but what he actually produced was just a croak. In his surprise, Gary almost dropped the phone. "How did you learn our language so perfectly?" he stammered. "I know everything, and a lot more besides. You do not know who you are dealing with." Gary turned back to his phone again. Zim whipped out a pack leg, and with it, he smacked the phone from the human's hand. It went bouncing off into the rain in the dark. When Gary dived for the phone, Zim dived for the fence. Activating a short-distance laser from his pack that was used for maintenance than for defense, Zim blasted it into the lower wire. When Gary came back, he pulled in his pack legs and squeezed through the freshly melting gap, despite his red-hot fear of anything relating to wires. The gap was too small and too low for Gary to get through, but as Zim crawled under the opening, having almost made it all the way out, the human grabbed his leg. It was only now that Zim saw the green blood all over Gary's hands. It was on the floor, on the lower fencing, and as he looked, he saw with great alarm that the left side of his coat was saturated in emerald fluid. "Don't you dare get away," Gary was saying. "You're gonna make me a rich, rich man! I'll be more famous than the president!" His words were not that dissimilar to Dib's, once upon a time. Zim let out a hefty kick with his boot against Gary's hand, even though it caused him great agony. He was sure that it was too late. His spooch must have burst by now. Why he was so unwell, he had no idea. All he could go on, all he could blame, was the failure in his pack. Gary cried out and let go, holding his hand. Zim crawled through the rest of the opening, but no longer had the strength to stand. Gary, meanwhile, fetched his hands around the wire fencing and tugged, but it would not budge. He also could not climb it. The top of the fence was crowned with barbed wire. He looked at Zim desperately through the links and saw his fame escaping him. Though this was a victory for Zim, it felt more like defeat. The upper port in his pack had started to blink red. It was a signal to all other Urkins that this one was now dying. The rain had found new potency, and it was now pouring down.